short history on the El.Khalili. Hisham El.Meniawy.
Okay.
Thank you, Hisham.
Okay, welcome.
Right. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
First of all, I would like to say that it's my pleasure to be with you this morning, and I hope that I will give you a little bit of an idea about the history of El.Khalili as part of Islamic Cairo. But of course, definitely, when we talk about El.Khalili, we'll talk about the history of Islam in Egypt and also the heart of the Islamic Cairo. We cannot actually split them from each other. So I understand from talking to you individually that most of you have lived in Egypt, especially in Cairo, for quite some times. And even some of you maybe know Cairo better than me. So this is the map of old Cairo and part of downtown with the River Nile, as you can see, just to imagine the location of El.Khalili and how far is it from the River Nile. To understand the location and why it is actually inland that much, it's not close to the River Nile, we have to understand the mentality and the background of the Arabs who came from Saudi Arabia by the early 7th century AD, 641 AD, when the Arabs came here to Egypt. The city of Alexandria was the capital of Egypt for almost 900 years. So they decided to move the capital from Alexandria to downtown, this area which is now known as Cairo. Of course, it was never called Cairo when the Arabs came here to Egypt. Originally, this area was inhabited by the ancient Egyptians, and it had one of the main cities in Egypt thousands of years ago. Actually, it had the city of Memphis, which was the first capital of the United Kingdom of Upper and Lower Egypt. The city of Memphis was established about 3000 BC. And either it was the capital of Egypt or it was the military capital of Egypt when they moved the capital down to Luxor. The area which is now known as Greater Cairo was one of the main cities in Egypt all through history. So when the Arabs moved the capital from Alexandria down to Cairo, the so-called area Cairo now, they decided to build their new capital inland and not close to the River Nile. So they built a small town called Al-Fustat, and then after Al-Fustat they built or rebuilt another capital which is Al-Qata'a, and then Al-Askar, and then later Cairo by the time of the Fatimids. And Cairo originally, the name Cairo originally in Arabic is Al-Qahira. Cairo is the name known by Europeans. Usually you get many of the names either of cities, places, kings, queens, and individual Egyptians pronounced in the wrong way because of the difficulty of learning or pronouncing Arabic names. So when the early travelers came here to Egypt and they couldn't pronounce Al-Qahira, turned to be Cairo. Cairo established about 1,000 years ago by the time of the Fatimids. And the Fatimids came originally from Morocco. They came invading the whole north of Africa until they reached Egypt, and their leader Al-Khalifa, Khalifa means the follower, and the title is given to the king of the Islamic world. The follower means the follower of Prophet Muhammad. So Khalifa, the word Khalifa means the follower of Prophet Muhammad, which means that he's ruling his kingdom or his empire according to the instructions and the sayings of Prophet Muhammad. This is how it should be. So Khalifa, Mu'izz, Lidin, Allah, Al-Fatimi. Yeah? Fatimis. They were originally Moroccans, and they came to establish their kingdom here in Egypt. and he was the first one to build the city which is now known as Cairo or Al-Qahira. I mentioned 3 names before Cairo. Al-Fustat. Where is Al-Fustat from here? It's not far from here, by the way. And if you've heard about Coptic Cairo, yeah, Coptic Cairo, where we have the most fabulous and ancient Coptic churches in Egypt. We have the first mosque in Egypt and in Africa, which is the mosque of Amr ibn al-As. Amr ibn al-As is not far from the Coptic church. If you went to this place, I'm sure that you've seen a massive mosque there. It's the first mosque in Egypt and obviously in the whole of Africa. This area is called Al-Fustat. And by the way, the word Fustat in Arabic means tent. Yeah, the name was given because when the Arabs came here, they lived in tents. I mean, the army actually they camped, so they had tents, very much like their Bedouin life back home in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, so Al-Fustat, Al-Askar. Where is Al-Qata'a? Where is Al-Qata'a? Is where we have another beautiful Islamic monumental site. Includes the mosque of Ahmad ibn Tulun. If you've heard the name before, it's one of the very early mosques as well, and it was maybe one of the very first 5 mosques in the whole of Egypt, and it was designed according to the design of the famous mosque in Surra Man Ra'a, Samarkand in Iraq. It's a square minaret, quite unique. Yeah, and then we come to Cairo. I just meant to give you very brief idea about the history of this place, because if you look here at the map, you can see this is the citadel. Yeah, and by the way, the citadel, when we say the citadel, that should be followed by the name Salah ad-Din, Saladin. And when we say Saladin, we mean the famous Saladin and the Crusades and Richard the Lionheart and all these stories, yeah? The citadel of Saladin, not much left. And it's funny, I'm a Cairoer. I was born in Cairo, was brought up in Cairo, lived all my life in Cairo, so traveling here and there, but 95% of my life I spent in Cairo. And believe me if I tell you that most of the people who live in Cairo, not Egypt, most of them who live in Cairo, they think by a mistake that the mosque of Muhammad Ali is the citadel of Saladin. Yeah? The locals, when you ask them, what is this, when you point out the mosque, they say, this is the citadel of Saladin. No, this is not the citadel of Saladin. Simply, this is the mosque of Muhammad Ali, which was built like 800 years after the construction of the citadel of Saladin. What is left from the citadel, you can see today, is only the outer walls and some of the towers. That's it. Muhammad Ali built his beautiful mosque according to the design of the Ottoman mosques in Turkey, mainly in Istanbul. If you've been there, you can easily notice the similarity of the mosques between Muhammad Ali's mosque and the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, or the Mosque of Sultan Ahmed, and so on. So this is the citadel of Saladin and the Mosque of Muhammad Ali. Up there is the area of El.Khalili, which is, now you can reach it in about 10 minutes drive. Well, well, yeah, this is how it should be. Yeah, and actually, not far from El.Khalili is also a very rich Islamic monumental site, and there is large number of mosques there. And the area located between Al-Azhar and El.Khalili and the citadel with the Mosque of Muhammad Ali is now being developed massively by the charity organization of the Aga Khans, the family of the Aga Khan, and they built what is now known as Al-Azhar Park, yeah, spreading between the area of Al-Azhar and El.Khalili from one side and the citadel of Saladin and the Mosque of Muhammad Ali on the other side. Okay, this is again another detailed map of the Islamic Cairo. Well, here, ladies and gentlemen, you can see a smaller map of the area of El.Khalili, which looks here on the very left-hand side, while the main area here is the famous street which is called Al-Mu'izz. Have you ever heard the name before? Yeah, Al-Mu'izz Street. Al-Mu'izz Street is the heart and the jewel of the Islamic monuments in Egypt and maybe in the Islamic world. It's an amazing street. When we talk about the history of Islamic Cairo, we have to mention, by all means, the Fatimis. As I mentioned, they came from Morocco and they established Cairo. And their leaders and viziers, they built a fortified wall surrounding Cairo. We'll come to see the wall and the gates now. Like all the other old cities worldwide, they had walls and gates.
What time is this?
We're talking about 1,000 years ago, the 10th century AD. Yeah, around the 10th century AD. And by the way, after the fall of the Fatimis, Saladin conquered Egypt. Let's say conquered Egypt, because he was not Egyptian. Saladin was originally from Kurdistan, Iraq, north of Iraq. And he established a massive empire, but he's based in Cairo and lived in Cairo. And by the way, the time when Egypt was defeated, Egypt was led by the Fatimis. They were originally non-Egyptians, they were originally Moroccans, and defeated by the Saladin and his army. They were also non-Egyptians, and it's ironic to say that Egypt was under occupation for almost 2,000 years. Actually, 2,300 years. Since the time of the Greeks, with Alexander the Great, the fall of the Egyptian civilization, the Greeks. Then following the Greeks, the Romans. Then following the Romans, the Arabs. Yeah? From an Arab ruler to another Arab ruler, and after the Arabs, the Mamluks. We'll come to talk about the Mamluks. After the Mamluks, the Ottoman. Yeah? And by the end of the Ottoman, the royal family of Muhammad Ali, who was originally an Albanian officer in the Turkish army. And then for the first time, Egypt had its independence in July 1952, after the revolution or the movement of the Egyptian army against the royal family of Muhammad Ali and King Farouk, the very famous one. Yeah. So when we talk about Fatimi's Cairo, this is one picture of the gate. There are two gates next to each other, located in a place called Al-Jammaliya. Al-Jammaliya, and it is named after Badruddin al-Jammali. Badruddin al-Jammali was one of the viziers of the Fatimis, and he was the one in charge of establishing all these buildings, including the walls and the gates of Cairo. So this is the gate which is called the gate of Al-Futuh, Al-Futuh gate. Next to it, it's something called Al-Nasr gate. Futuh means openings, if we translate it literally in Arabic, which means it is the gate the army will use when they leave Cairo to invade the other lands. And Al-Nasr means victory, so the army will return through the other gates when they come back and having victory against their enemies. Actually, the gate, most people, when they go there, they don't notice the beauty of the gate. Have you seen this before? Have you seen it? You know where it is, roughly. Okay, it's the area is not very clean, and it's kind of chaos. And I think over the last couple of years, it's even became more. Lots of rubbish, dirt, and so on. So that makes people not able to focus and concentrate on the beauty of the gate. You can see some more pictures of the gate. But what I meant to show you here, look at the decoration. This is the scene we have here. Yeah? This is part of the gate. So now, with more focus on the decoration, what do you see? Can you see a cross?
Yes.
Can you see the cross?
Yes.
What? Can you see it? You see the cross over there? Do you see something else? Okay, can you see the Star of David? Many over there. Yeah? You got it? Okay, so we're talking about an Islamic monument, and the main decoration in this Islamic monument is the Christian cross and the Star of David. That would give you an idea about the tolerance of the early Muslims in Egypt, when they believed that they should be tolerating the other religions and they should live together. We are all members of the same family. There is no difference between Muslims and non-Muslims, Muslims and Christians, Muslim and Jews, Muslim and atheists even, or non-believers. Everyone has the right to live on this land in peace. Yeah? So we have very good example. If you read more into the history of Islamic Egypt or Islamic Cairo in particular, you find that many of the Islamic monuments were built by non-Muslims, especially the early mosques. Sometimes they made mistakes with the design because of the leveling of the mosque. They should be one level and so on, because they couldn't understand this according to their Christian or Jewish background, but they were learning anyway. So you get to see the similarity of the decoration between the Islamic monuments and the Christian monuments and the Jewish monuments, especially when you go to Old Cairo, what we call Old Cairo or Coptic Cairo. And I remember one day I had a couple of Americans. We went to visit Coptic Cairo, and we just finished visiting the Jewish temple, the synagogue of Ben Ezra. And we were, if you have been there, when you leave the synagogue and you turn left, take the way down to the little church where they had, or where they have the cave, believed to be the cave where the Holy Family was hiding from the Romans. Yeah, Saint Sergius, or Church of Abi Serga. Walking down this, we just left the Jewish temple. In front of us is a church, and it was noontime, so we could hear the call for the prayer coming from the nearby mosque. The lady cried, said that I haven't seen such this before except in Jerusalem. Yeah? So this is Egypt. This is Cairo, and this is the real Egypt. I just want to show you, although it is not related to our topic, but I said this is part of the gate as well. This is above you when you are walking down the gate. This, you can see those little windows where they throw oil, hot oil, on anybody trying to invade the city. Okay, now when we talk about the history of El.Khalili itself. Now we have an idea about the area in general, and the time we're talking about is almost like 600 and something years ago. El.Khalili. Why do we call it El.Khalili? Yeah? Kan in Arabic, Khan, very much like if you translate it into English, it's very much like motel. Yeah? It is a motel. Yeah? It is like a small hotel. It is like a hostel. Yeah? And when you read about the history of hotel business, they claim that the hotel business was established or was invented by the Americans. The early migrants from Europe went to the States, and they lived on the east first, and then traveling to the west, looking for gold and so on. Traveling in caravans, they needed places for accommodation and for getting the food and the water and so on. So this is totally wrong, because the idea of hospitality established by the Arabs hundreds and hundreds of years before discovering the new land. And because the Arabs mostly, they are not, well, Egypt now is part of the Arab world. And we say that we are Egyptians, we are Arabs as well. We are part of the Arab world, definitely. But we are very different from the Arabs. The Egyptians by nature are farmers. Yeah? While the rest of the Arabs are more or less like Bedouins. Traveling all the time, looking for food, looking for water, working in trades. While the Egyptians, which was one of the main reasons for building an early civilization, is stability. They were stable by the River Nile, lived by the River Nile, on the banks of the River Nile, and they learned agriculture. Agriculture means that you have to live in the same place waiting for the harvest. Yeah? So they learned stability from the River Nile, while the Arabs are always traveling around. So when they are traveling around, they are working in trade. They are selling and buying. And one of the very common journey was between Yemen in the south and Syria and Lebanon in the north. Okay, they get the dates, for example, from Yemen, and they get the grapes from Syria and Lebanon and so on. Besides other goods, of course, but this is just an example. So they were working in trade, they were traveling all the time, they were traveling in caravans, they needed like a place to have a rest, and these places they used to call it Khan or Khan. Yeah, Khan. So Khan means a building where people can spend a night, spend 2 nights, have a meal, do some shopping. It's very much like a hotel today. Yeah, you're traveling and you stop for a night here or there. Have a nice meal, sleep overnight, maybe do some shopping from the gift shop and so on, and then carry on your journey the following day. Okay, so the guy who established El.Khalili was one of the big businessmen at the time of one of the kings of Mamluks called Barkuk. That's the name of the king of Egypt, or the Sultan of Egypt, Sultan Barkuk. And that was about 600 years ago. When we talk about those sultans, including Barkuk, we are talking about the Mamluks. Have you heard this before? Mamluks? Yeah. Mamluks means owned. Yeah? If we translate it literally, so it means owned. Mamluks. They were owned by the royal family of Saladin. They were brought down to Egypt by that royal family of Saladin. They came originally from Soviet Union area, the Balkan city, and Asia Minor. They noticed that they are well built and they look good and they are very well also to be trained and become warriors. So they brought them as children, they brought them up here, they trained them well, not like slaves, but like soldiers who became promoted later on, became officers, and after like 200 years, within 200 years, they became the most powerful in the country. One of them, a lady, was married to the last member of the family of Saladin, called Salih Najmuddin Ayyub. When he died, she took over. So she got married to one of her people, the Mamluks, and made him the new king of Egypt, so changing the family, changing dynasty. And the Mamluks ruled for about 350 years. The Mamluks, although they were non-Egyptians, although they couldn't speak very good Arabic, originally they are not Egyptians, they don't speak Arabic, they only read the Quran maybe in Arabic and so, but they were great leaders. They defeated the enemies of Egypt, they kept Egypt united, and also they left us the most beautiful Islamic monuments we are still proud of until today, including what? My favorite mosque in the whole of Egypt is the mosque which is not far from the citadel of Saladin, called Sultan Hassan. If you haven't been to this mosque, you miss a lot. Yeah? Definitely. I know that when you travel around, you go to whatever country and you find the locals of that country saying, well, here we have the 8th wonder of the world. I'm sure that you've heard it in most countries. But believe me if I tell you that the mosque and madrasa, which means school, of Sultan Hassan must be one of the wonders of the world. No doubt. It's not just a mosque. It's a huge, massive, well-advanced complex built by Sultan Hassan, one of the Mamluks, the same family as the king or Sultan Barkuk. So the guy who was like one of the elite of the society, called Jerkas was originally from the city of El.Khalili in the occupied territory in Palestine, El.Khalili. So if you read my family name, you find my family name is El.Meniawy. And Meniawy comes from Menia. Yeah? Have you heard of Menia? Menia is the famous town or city where from Akhenaten and Nefertiti. So my family, when they moved from there to Cairo, they were named after their origin. Yeah? Blah blah al-Iskandarani, which means from Alexandria, and so on. Yeah? So when we say El.Khalili, it means that he is originally from El.Khalil. Yeah? Which is in the occupied territory in Palestine or in Israel now. Okay? So this is the name why it was called Khan el-Khalili. Khan, I explained what does it mean. The early historians mentioned Khan el-Khalili in their books, like someone very famous wrote in Arabic called Al-Maqrizi. He described, and I got some pictures here, definitely not original pictures, but imagination of how it should be or how it used to be. These pictures, by the way, are for the mosque of Sultan Barkuk, which is one of the beautiful mosques located in the street of Al-Mu'azz. Al-Mu'azz Street. After almost 100 years from building Khan el-Khalili for the first time, and before we go further, I just would like to mention that this Prince Jarkas El.Khalili, who built it for the first place, was anti-Shias. Do you know the Shias? Yeah? Egypt is a Sunni country. Egypt is mainly a Sunni country. But when the Fatimids came from Morocco, they were Shias. And they wanted to change the belief of the Egyptians from Sunni to Shias. They got the power, they got the money. They did lots of efforts. They built the Shias mosques and so on. After the fall of the Fatimids and back to the Sunni Egypt, you could always notice during the history there are some fanatic Sunnis who were trying to sweep the memory of the Shias completely from Egypt, which is, in my opinion, impossible. Impossible, because after all these years, hundreds of years, we can still see in our traditions, we are doing lots of Shias traditions, although we are practicing the Sunni sect. Yeah? It's in our blood. Festivals, religious events, and so on. So, the guy, Jarkas Al-Khalili, when he decided to build his Khan, he has chosen the area where the Fatimids, the Shias, had their cemetery, their graveyard. And he said that I need to humiliate them even when they are dead. And he collected all the bones and the remains of the Fatimids families and their leader El.Meniawy Dinillah, and they moved it to what is known today as the Eastern Cemetery, or as it is mentioned in most of the guidebooks, the City of the Dead. Well, no, not really, but originally, because that was outside the walls, yeah, like desert. So they took all the remains and the bones to this area, which will be used later on by the Mamluks and the later leaders as a cemetery. Why do we call it the City of the Dead today? Because in the 60s and 70s, mainly 60s and the 70s, many of the immigrants who came from the countryside, especially in Upper Egypt, looking for jobs here, and we had a problem, not very much like today, but we had a severe problem with housing. It was very difficult to get a flat or an apartment. It was very expensive and difficult. So those who were traveling down to Cairo, educating in schools or universities and trying to find jobs here, definitely better opportunity in Cairo, they couldn't find a place to live in. And in our cemeteries and graveyards, we are still influenced by the ancient Egyptians. If you go to a place like Saqqara, Saqqara, where the Step Pyramid is, you find buildings called mastabas. The mastaba is the tomb built for the noblemen, members of the royal family, owners of the land, governors, and so on. And you get into one of those mastabas, you find like a house, many rooms. Some of them, like Meruka is one of the most beautiful one there, got 33 rooms in this tomb. Underneath is the shaft and the burial place. To today, in our family, we have our own cemetery, our own graveyard. It's like a small house. We have 2 rooms, bathroom, and little kitchen or a kitchenette. And underneath is the graveyard. Even underneath, there are rooms. One for the ladies, one for the gents, and one for charity. If somebody who doesn't have a graveyard or so and would like to be buried in our tomb, fine, that could be done. but in a separate place. So we have one for the ladies, one for the... Fine. Why do we have a building and like a house above ground? Because since the time of the ancient Egyptians and later the Greeks and later the Romans, it's traditionally we do the same thing. We go and spend the whole day, certain days of the year, visiting our ancestors. In ancient Egypt, you used to read from the Book of the Dead. Today we read from the Quran. We bring food with us so we can do some charity. My generation don't do this anymore. But I'm talking about, let's say, my grandmother. When people had time and had the ability to do this, spend like the full day there. So they need like a sheltered house. Fine. Those who came from Upper Egypt and so on wanted to live in Cairo and they couldn't afford buying an apartment or even renting an apartment, they could stay in those houses on top of the tombs in this graveyard. They can accept living in it, no problem, because they would pay only just a few pounds. They can afford it. So for almost 20 years, this area was highly inhabited by large number. That's why it is described in the guidebooks as the Book of the Dead. Now not many people live there. Only those who are guarding the tombs and so on. Most people left to other places, decent houses and so on. But anyway, the Eastern Cemetery, it has also beautiful Islamic monuments there, also neglected like many of the monuments we have in Cairo or in Egypt. 140, 150 years later, after establishing Khan El.Khalili for the first time, it was demolished and was rebuilt. So that's almost like 500 years ago. 500 years ago, Khan El.Khalili was rebuilt for the second time by the time of Al-Ghuri. And I'm sure that you've heard the name before. Yeah? Have you seen the Whirling Dervish show in Cairo? Yeah? It's down this area, somewhere down this area, yes? So it is in the building owned by Al-Ghuri. Yeah? Culture Palace of Al-Ghuriya. Ghuriya named after Al-Ghuri. Yeah? By the way, this is the design of the Mamluks minarets, which is the majority of the minarets you see here in Egypt, or at least in Cairo. These are some old pictures, black and white pictures for the inside of Khan El.Khalili. This is just painting, while this is a real picture from last century. I like this one because it shows the windows and what we call mashrabiya. And mashrabiya is decorated with the arabesque, comes from Arabic. Arabesque design, very much like the partition over there. So the mashrabiya allows the lady to see through from inside the house without being seen. So all the windows in the old buildings used to have this mashrabiya design. So the design of Khan El.Khalili was a square building. The ground floor has the shops, and above in the first floor they had the rooms for accommodation. And in the open area they used to have entertainment, dancing, and also banquets and so on. Belly dancing, of course, belly dancing is one of the early shows they used to have in Egypt, and it's quite unique in Egypt. Maybe now you can find belly dancing in most of the Arab world and even in England. I was invited many years ago. I was visiting England, and I think it was in Northampton. I was invited by a friend who was joining like a belly dancing school or something like this. Fine. Honestly, it was a shock. To me, it was a shock, because I went to a place like a ballroom, and I found like more than 1,000 ladies, British, all in belly dancing costume. I said, ladies, I've never seen this number of belly dancers in my entire life. And we had like a tournament or a competition. It was great fun. So this is the tanura. Or the whirling dervish. What do you know about tanura?
It comes, where is it? No, it's not from Egypt, they come. Turkey, yes. And they're quite, there's a lot of, I know in Cyprus and Turkey there's quite a lot, it's pretty big still. And there's a small sect here, isn't there, in somewhere in the...
You're talking about the Sufis?
Yes.
Excellent.
And Sufism is
excellent.
I actually went to a Sufi meeting here in Maadi a few months back. Excellent. And it was something, I thought anybody could become a Sufi, but I didn't understand until I went to that meeting that you had to be a Muslim because you had to understand Islam.
Excellent. This is very good. And it will help us to understand the history of El.Khalili as well. This is why I brought this pictures of the tanura, what we call tanura. Tanura means skirt or kilt, yeah, in Arabic, tanura, because they wear that very special dress or this special kilt. And originally is